You say, tell me what's your biggest pain. Like, what annoys you in the day? Like, where, just tell me anything. And after you do this, 100 plus times, you start to hear the same things over and over. And then you start creating like a word cloud of this, of like, what are the things that pop up the most? And the operating room just kept coming up. Like, it's a black box. People don't really know what goes on there. There's a lot of inefficiency. It has a direct impact on the patient's life. It's making up to 40%, 40 to 60% of a hospital's expenses, and even more than that of their revenue. So it's kind of like the beating heart of a hospital. And the more that we dove into this, it was like, wow, this is actually has a massive impact on the healthcare market. Let's see if there's what we can do here. What is actually needed to build staff this? Today are so overburdened with the amount of administration that they have to handle. That's it's almost like handling the patient becomes secondary, and that's definitely not the way that I think we all would like healthcare to go. And it's
Great. Hi, Thomas. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, nice to be here.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you on to talk about, VitVio, talk about what it is you're doing. So, brief introduction. You're Thomas, this founder and CEO of VitVio. Just to kind of get things started, why don't you tell me, what is VitVio and walk me through the founding story, how you got here, what the ambition was, and what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, at Vivio, what we do is we build computer vision ambient sensing solutions for operating rooms to help drive efficiency, reduce administrative burden, increase billing capture, and then ultimately increase patient safety as well. Basically, in long story short, what we do is we go into an operating room, deploy a couple cameras into the ceiling, we start tracking all the people, equipment, fixtures, fittings, processes, you name it, and then basically digitalize the OR into 3D to understand kind of who's doing what, when, where, why within the context of their processes, and then use that context to deploy AI agents on top of it to act as another staff member in the room to take over some of that administrative burden that they typically have on their head. Staff today are so overburdened with the amount of administration that they have to handle. That's it's almost like handling the patient becomes secondary, and that's definitely not the way that I think we all would like healthcare to go. And it's definitely not the clinicians and staff member preference. We truly believe that the need for this administration is there. Like, you have to log this for safety purposes and for keeping a record of what's occurring, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the staff members doing it. So our goal overall is to get the staff member focused on the patient while we kind of handle the rest. Yeah, I guess a little bit about me, my background. Yeah, so as you mentioned, the CEO of Vitvio. Over the last like decade and a half, I've had the pleasure of helping build a couple hypergrowth startups that have kind of gone from that 0 to billion mark or pretty quickly approaching it in various industries. So, for example, one of the first places where I cut my teeth is I was one of the early employees at a company called Kiwi.com. That's like it's an online travel company similar to Skyscanner, Kayak, and actually Forbes last year it was rated as the most used travel engine. So joined that in the super early days. You're talking like 10, 15 people. It was really, really tiny. It wasn't even called Kiwi when I joined. It was called Skypicker. Once you start to work with Skyscanner, kind of had to make the change of the name to be able to continue that relationship. But yeah, over the span of like 3.5 years, we went from 10, 15 people to 3,000 people and nearly $1 billion revenue. So it was quite a wild ride, as you might imagine. Did a couple of things in between, but most relevant to what we do at Vitvio is I was head of product and part of the executive board for a company called iFi, which I guarantee you've never heard of, or I don't think anybody else will have heard of it, but people probably know what iFi does. So iFi builds autonomous stores. So if you've ever heard of like Amazon Go, where you can kind of walk in, take what you want, and then just walk out, no cashier, iFi is Amazon's #1 competitor in that space. It actually has more autonomous stores globally deployed than Amazon. So I joined that before we even had a single store. We were actually working out of a garage in Silicon Valley, so I got my generic Silicon Valley story, and then helped scale that up over the next 3.5 years to surpass Amazon. The reason that people never hear about iFi is what we're doing is white labeling it and then selling it to the big retailers like Aldi, Tesco, Walmart, Dollar General, Marks and Spencers, so on and so forth. And there's a lot of stadiums across the U.S. that are using it, like the LA Clippers has this, like their merchandise and concessions all automated, and also in airports as well. Now we're doing a bit of a tech transfer and kind of taking our experience from that space and applying it into the ORs. A majority of our team actually comes from that background, so either worked with me at iFi in the early days, or for example, our CTO used to be an executive for our #1 competitor in that space, a company called Standard AI, which so for me and him for many years we're going kind of head to head against each other before we decided to join hands and see how we could apply this into the operating rooms to actually help people.
Wow. Yeah, that was That was wonderful. Thank you for the, really detailed introduction. A lot of history
Yeah,
there, a lot to go through.
it's been
One
fun.
thing I'm really noticing is, you've always kind of been, at least for the last 10, 15 years or so, drawn to these small startups, right? Working at Kiwi or iFi, with whether it's a head of innovation, head of product, um, kind of taking these small companies and really just accelerating them. What is it that drew you to this startup space, drew you to, coming into these kind of small initiatives and, blowing them up?
Being a masochist. No, the reality is, so maybe just to give context, I always, let's say about a decade and some change ago, I was in college and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and but I didn't feel like I was going the right route. So I decided to kind of take a sidestep on that and drop out, and then start to look for a place where I could start leaning into kind of the startup culture and look for something where it could grow really quickly. At that time, I was actually living in Seattle, and I ended up meeting my wife there. Proposed to her after 2 weeks of knowing her, but that's for another time. But that was 10 years ago, so we're doing very well. We're very happy. But I ended up following her out to Europe, and when I was here, I was like, okay, I could go back into the normal grind, get back into school, or go find some typical job on the side to kind of support that. Or what I could do is try to just find a startup that looks like it would be high potential and just do whatever it takes to get in the door at any level. So I found Skypicker in the early days, or Kiwi.com, and literally wrote them, just chasing them, saying, "Hey, I want to help. What can I do? I'll sweep floors. I don't care what it is." Long story short, like a week later, I got hired on board as an analyst. And at that size of the company, with things moving how fast they were, there was a lot of potential to move upwards. So I went from like an analyst to leading a team within the span of 3 months. And then it just kind of took off from there, because you try one thing, you experiment, you learn quickly. And I became really obsessed with just like learning on my own on how to deliver these things and get better at it. So I was like, I'm telling you, I did not sleep. I was like going from work to go home to start my second job of like teaching myself how to do everything that I needed to be able to be a good like product leader. And it really paid off. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the culture, with the ability to move quickly and the impact you could have on people, and it just stuck with me from like day one. And I did take a short stint. So after a period of time, I did step into kind of a larger corporate. I mean, it was still like a scale up. So I joined a company called Fusion Group, which, if you've ever been in a store and seen like those electronic shelf labels, those like e-paper displays in a store, if you've ever seen those in a store, you've probably seen my product. So I was the global vice president of product for the company that creates like 90% market share on that. And that company was already doing like 800 million a year when I joined, and when I left 2 years later, we were doing about 1.2 billion. So it was still amazing growth within that time period. And they brought me on to help them like consolidate their product lines, and they did a bunch of M&A and how to like merge those products to cross sell and upsell between them. But I just felt like it was missing something. I mean, it was at this later stage company where the culture wasn't. It was already kind of a corporate culture that was a little bit further along. I didn't feel, even though I was the global vice president of product, I still felt like I couldn't have as much impact as I could at a lower level in a startup where I could really move quickly and help shape that direction a lot. And it made me kind of realize what I love is I love to be at the ground floor and love to have that larger impact on it. And stepping into a company that's already a little bit further down the line, well, there's amazing impact you can have. I think my passion is really in that like creation space. You know what I mean? I just am addicted to it, and I really love the kinds of people that get drawn to startups. There's just no better people to surround yourself with. And I never wanted to go create my own company off the bat. That wasn't my goal. Wasn't to become a CEO. My goal was to work on things that I thought were important or meaningful or also cool. But there was a moment where it just kind of hit me, like I was surrounded with the right people at the right time, and I was like, hey, this is an hour never with these people. And it just kind of it felt right. So it's like I was waiting for that moment of serendipity to actually step in and create my own thing.
And I feel like it worked out perfectly with the passion for kind of just being at the ground floor, building things. I think you were, even though you said your goal was never to become a CEO, I feel like those shoes were there for you to fill. Um, so before you dropped out, what is it that you were studying?
So I was going into psychology. I wanted to do a dual degree that was focused on psychology and physiology, to basically do somewhere in between. So psychiatrist kind of, but focus more on the physical aspect, and but being able to prescribe, also for mental illnesses too. but it was also I just don't think that I would have done well with it, to be honest. I think that the startup culture and the startup way of working fit suits me a lot better on the flexibility and the agility of what you can do. And I was never the perfect student. I was always kind of bucking the responsibility there. I wasn't able to like, the long term goals if I felt they were, or the long term like tasks. If I felt like I was just checking something off a list because it had to be checked off a list, I was never really passionate about it. And I think that's why shifting in this direction was a really really good like a decision to align with kind of my values of I want to be doing meaningful things all the time. Otherwise, I feel like I'm not getting meaning out of my life, and so that's why I had to shift in that direction. I mean, it's not for everybody. In fact, like most of the time, I tell people probably the best path is to go into uni, go study what you find really important, and then get let's say culture, let's say cultivate that passion over a couple of years. Because what happened with me, it does have a lot of luck. I did get in with some really good companies very early, and yeah, there was a lot of hard work associated to it, but there's also a lot of luck. Like it's very easily those successes that I was a part of could have not gone well, and if they didn't go well, I'd be in a much worse position than I am today. So I mean, it's just it's hard work, luck, and kind of what suits your style the best, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of factors that go into it. Something we've been talking about recently on the team actually is the whole culture right now with VCs trying to get kids to drop out and start their own companies. So, but the main reason I asked what you were studying is because I see this transition from like psychology and then going into Kiwi and then going into retail tech, and now you're ending up in OR tech. So how does this transition happen? How do you eventually end up in the
Yeah.
healthcare space, and why the operating room space in particular? What's the, specific ambition driving you to this problem?
I mean, the funny answer on this is that if being in a leading a startup wasn't masochistic enough, then going into healthcare is definitely how you level it up a little bit more. I mean, but the real answer is much more serious, and I say like I think very personal. So about 2.5 years ago, I was just leaving iFi, the autonomous store company. I was stepping into Fusion Group, and I was in this like transition period between the two. And so one of my co-founders, he wasn't my co-founder at the time, but he was one of my friends who worked with me at iFi. He actually worked in my team there, in the product team. He invited me out to go on this sailing trip in the north of Scotland for 7 days with a bunch of people that I didn't know. And I was like, I do not want to go sailing in the north of Scotland, which is not known for being sunny. It's always rainy and overcast there, with a bunch of people I don't know, except for one. But one of the other people called me from the boat, like one of the people who's going the trip, called me and said, "Hey, Thomas, you're probably wondering, like, or saying to yourself, like, you don't want to go on a boat with a bunch of people that you don't know in the north of Scotland for 7 days. That sounds miserable. But I'm begging you, please come. I really want to meet you." And that guy actually turned out to be my second co-founder now, a guy named Max. And so two of my co-founders, we met on that boat. And it was for that moment, it was like co-founder at first sight. You kind of meet each other, you talk, and you're just like, I don't know what it is, but one day I want to do something with you. I don't know when that one day is, but like we're gonna do something, and it has to happen. But then life hits you even harder, or the hardest, when you least expect it. So I'm flying high at that moment. I'm like just left, I've got this new cool job in a bigger corporate lined up, and I'm like, all right, cool. Like this is like the best place you can be, especially for somebody who didn't graduate and kind of bypassed a lot of those steps. I feel very fortunate to be where I was. And then the moment that I step off that sailing boat, I got a phone call that evening. My father had passed away due to heart failure. So the last time I ever spoke to him was on the boat. So I spoke to him. We were standing on the ocean, looking out. I was having a conversation with him about like feeling great about where things are going. Then the very next day, I get a phone call that he had passed away over the night, very very suddenly. Just one day he's there, next day he's gone, and that moment, I don't know how to explain it to you other than the only way that you can really explain to somebody is if they went through that or had that moment. But we have all had something similar where you get up in the morning, you go to the mirror, and you kind of look at yourself in the mirror, and you just go, "I'm not doing the right thing," or "I'm not like I need to make a change, and I don't know what that change was or what that change is, but I need to make a change." And that moment for me was when my father passed away. My father and I were very very close. So I flew out to Florida. I'm dealing with my father's affairs and all this. And as I was getting through that, I was also starting to think about like, what does this all mean to me, and how that impacts it. And I knew at that moment that my father was a dental surgeon that specialized in dental laser dentistry, but also was a dual MD as well. So he was also practicing medicine and writing papers on this too. And about 7 years or 7 years prior to this, like when I was starting out at when I was like just going into IFI, my father and I tried to start a company together that was like a telemedicine company before telemedicine was a thing. It was like, we had this idea about, oh, you can make an app for telemedicine. And it was like, this wasn't the thing. So it was very cool. It was like exciting, but it was at the same time iFi was kind of starting. So at some point I had to kill it off and say, hey, I need to like focus on iFi. This is a really good opportunity, Dad. I'm sorry. Let's pause that. And you know, the funny part is the name of that company was Vipio. And when my father passed away, the only thing that I inherited from him was he kept the domain name all those years, kind of hoping that we'd go back and do it one day. So yeah, it means life path in Latin, and that was like the kind of moment where it hit me like, all right, like we're gonna create something here. And originally, when I started to like, how did we get to the operating rooms? Originally, we started looking into things that could have potentially saved my father's life, like we were looking at Bluetooth wearables to track like vitals, to aggregate multiple Bluetooth devices in, and then try to plan out like or like look at long term trends to predict these kind of indicators. But the problem is that like Apple and Google could kill you overnight if they decide to, because they own the upstream data of it. So I knew it was an uninvestable idea. So that was like the first kind of idea. And then we were saying, okay, and this is now I brought on my co-founder Max, and he was like kind of ideating on it with me. And I had a conversation. We went and we did like hundreds of interviews with hospitals, doctors, clinicians of all random types, just to hear. And we wouldn't go in like trying to get like guide them or show them what we're doing. We would say, tell me what's your biggest pain, like what annoys you in the day, like where, just tell me anything. And after you do this 100 plus times, you start to hear the same things over and over, and then you start creating like a word cloud of this, of like what are the things that pop up the most. And the operating room just kept coming up. Like it's a black box. People don't really know what goes on there. There's a lot of inefficiency. It has a direct impact on the patient's life. It's making up to 40%, 40 to 60% of a hospital's expenses, and even more than that of their revenue. So it's kind of like the beating heart of a hospital. And the more that we dove into this, it was like, wow, this is actually has a massive impact on the healthcare market. Let's see if there's what we can do here. What is actually needed to build this? And again, that goes into interviews and so on. And ultimately came out saying, actually, our skill set fits really well, like our background in the autonomous retail space, because going into the ORs, it's mostly visual and audio cues and so on. If we can take this a similar technology and apply that in the ORs, we can actually have a material impact on their day to day. So it was really born from the hospital, but driven by like a very personal thing that occurred that like made me go, okay, I want to get into something that's a little bit more meaningful, because I kind of felt like over the past I was just building things I thought were really cool and trying to get into like rule the cool. Like, but that wasn't something where if I was on my deathbed tomorrow that I'd look back and be like, I did something meaningful. And that was kind of what drove it in the first place.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your father, but I think it's a beautiful story how everything, kind of comes together.
Every day is an homage to him, man. I mean, it's literally the name of the company is the name of what our project together. So I feel very happy to know that. Like I can wake up every day and it's like, if the meaning of the company is not enough, it's like I'm not going to fail because it's literally the thing that my father and I worked on together.
Yeah, yeah, I think that that's really quite beautiful. One thing I did want to touch on, it seems like you guys went through, a lot of research when, deciding upon the problem, coming to a conclusion on, what to build, how to build it. One thing I did notice also previously from your website and from things you've mentioned in the past is that Vitvio's product, your goals, and your principles are all like heavily based on academic papers and research. Have you
Yes.
always been tapped into research related to like medicine or ORs? And how do you keep up, like especially as things advance so quickly in AI and medicine? Like, this is literally what I'm studying, and I have a hard time keeping up with it. So, is this something you've always been into? How do you keep up with the space? What's the story behind that?
Uh, no, I would say that this is something that was drawn of a necessity because we didn't know the market. So the one thing that we did know going into this is that we didn't know. And that's that knowledge and that like honesty with yourself helps a lot to not cause you to go down a path assuming you know what you're talking about when it's far more complex than you can give it credit for. Sometimes it's very easy to hand wave things away. So one of the first things that we want to do is say, okay, since we didn't come from this background and we haven't spent our life in healthcare, there's kind of two things that we need to do. First one is right away go build an advisory board of like amazing clinicians who can give us that insight, who have the connections to connect, like to introduce us to other amazing clinicians because they all typically know each other. And let's like tap into their knowledge. The second thing that we'll do is let's base every product decision that we have on an existing research paper that isn't necessarily where they automated it, but there's in healthcare, there's a ton of research papers around doing similar stuff, but manually, where they literally stood in there, they like work on this manually, they determine the impact, like how long did it take, what was the impact when they did an adjustment to the schedule or like to the way that of the process. And let's just like comb, let's just start accumulating all these research papers and then use those as a baseline to support our decision making on a product. Because if you don't know, you need, but these PhDs spend their entire life on it. If we can just automate what they did manually, then we're like in a much safer spot because it's already something that's been validated. So that was kind of where it kind of was like born out of, and it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. We have like hundreds of research papers that we've gone through at this point. What we do also use, we do use some tools for this. So there's a company called Pedal that we use, where basically we can pull in research papers, we can annotate those. It creates like an LLM that allows you to kind of talk with the research paper and find some details around it, and aggregate multiple research papers to kind of find the let's say similarities or the things between them that are relevant. And that's been really helpful for us. So typically what we do is like our entire team kind of has access to this portal. And as we find more relevant papers, we upload it. We like somebody will annotate it as they're reading through the paper. And then the highlights will get brought out for everybody else in the team. So we can kind of do a summary of those highlights as time goes on. That's how we keep up with it. I think that it's definitely extremely valuable in the very earliest stages when you don't have anything else, because I was able to walk into VCs and say, hey, we're I'm raising on a pitch deck in a dream, but here's all the research papers that support why this is a great idea. And that's a much more powerful way to raise than to walk into, or even going to the hospitals, the first hospitals, when they say like, hospitals are very risk averse. You go to a hospital, you tell them like, hey, I want to deploy cameras in your ceiling, and no, I have no evidence of it working. Good luck. So what we were doing is basically saying, hey, we haven't done this yet, but we do have this background in the autonomous retail, and we have all these research papers that support it. Do you want to take a punt on this? Because if you do, there's a high chance that it's going to have a success, and we want to work with you as partners hand in hand to build that. And it's a much easier sell from both VC and the kind of commercial perspective of getting into the ORs quickly. So yeah, I mean, it was born out of necessity. I definitely, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying before of like doing meaningful things. For me, it was like this was a really meaningful for us to dive deep into these.
Yeah, no, I think the definitely getting the knowledge base necessary is I think it's one of the most difficult parts when working on a project, but I think it's definitely one of the most rewarding. Kind of speaking more on the technology side of things, putting cameras into the ceiling. One thing just I'm curious about how the whole system works. So when there's an operation going on, how does the system kind of know specifically what operation is being performed? Does someone go like type that in somewhere, or can it just pick up on that from context?
Yeah, so it's first thing first is we integrate to the EHR systems and to the scheduling system. So we already pull the surgical schedule in, so we know what kind of surgery goes on in there. And luckily, comparatively to something like retail, operations are a lot more standardized. Like there's a process. The patient has to arrive, they have to be put under anesthetic, there's a knife to skin, there's a wound closure, there's, wheels in, wheels out. I mean, it's very, there's a lot of standardized steps, which means that when you train on one surgery, you can actually generalize that across quite a few surgeries, or at least a lot of the steps within it. So what we do is we typically, these cameras go in, we go in and we calibrate the cameras. So basically we put down these patterns, the cameras can see each of the patterns, and then they kind of know their spatial positioning. And then we have patented our own model for doing 3D positioning of the people, objects, tools, everything within the room, so that we can kind of track and use those as pre-context to understand things. So to simplify kind of how we would understand something is, let's say that we're going in for a left knee replacement. There's kind of two ways that we would understand that. Like, I'll give you two examples of steps. So once the patient arrives, so we see the bed come in, we see the wheels in, we already detect it right away. They move the patient to bed. Okay, now we know that we're getting closer to like surgery starting. We see the surgeon walk over and pick up a scalpel. Now we have a precursor saying the scalpel is in the hand. Scalpel is now close to skin. You probably can say that you're doing a knife to skin at that moment. So there's all these kind of like, let's say like precursor knowledge that goes into the system that's based on the things that we're detecting within the room. Or another good example is like when you're suturing a patient, there's a very exaggerated hand movements, because they're pulling the suture closed to try to get as tight as possible. That's a good example of being able to tell like when a suture event was. So a lot of these things, it's based on kind of a culmination of the different things running in the room, and then kind of training the models to look for those things to occur. And you do have the context because you know that a knife to skin can't happen if the patient isn't in the room. So you kind of know that there's a structure to the way that this occurs. So it like narrows down the scope of what you need to be looking for at any one time.
And when you speak about the training, getting the model or getting the whole system
Yeah.
to know what's going on, to get from the context and from the prior knowledge to, you know, detect events, how did
Yeah.
you, or I guess, how did y'all do your training to make sure when the model knows when to log and track events? Did you manage to get a ton of OR footage, and then, feed that in? How did that happen?
So it's two ways. So first way is one of the very first things that we did is we deployed a simulated operating room in partnership with a company called Arthrex, which is a very big orthopedics provider of medical devices and like implants and so on. So in the UK we have an operating room deployed with them that has cameras in the ceiling. It's a gassed OR, and what we did is one of the first steps is we brought in surgeons, surgical staff to basically run surgeries, fake surgeries on a mannequin on repeat with the full thing, like make the incision on a pad, suture that pad, do the whole 9 yards, take everybody out, take the wheel them out, wheel them in, and do this on repeat for days, so you can kind of get the baseline training for it. The other thing that we did is we built the system to be robust and not having that data. So when we go into a new hospital, it's not automated from day one. It's not like it goes in and from the very first surgery it starts detecting everything, because that's impossible, because all the different hospitals have slightly different processes. Of course, there's a lot of standardization, and as the more data that we get with that, the quicker it becomes. But the way that we built it is that for every automatic detection, we have fallbacks to a manual way of triggering it. So, for example, if you're a scrub nurse or surgical tech in the operating room, you have a dashboard like that. You can see what predictions that we're making or not making. You can see every stage of the surgery that's oncoming, and they have a button where they can walk up and they can press like next stage, next stage, next stage. And what that does is it's annotating it for us inside the operating room. So it's basically them training the system to look at what's occurring right now. What were the precursors? What happened 30 seconds before? What happened 30 seconds after? And then what we do is we start to train the system. So we go through kind of three phases in the beginning of any hospital. We go through like the training phase, which is this phase where they'll click next stage, next stage, next stage. Then we get to what's called augmentation phase, where that we will start to predict certain things and push that to them saying, hey, we've detected knife to skin at 12:01. Can you just confirm that's correct? And I want them to hit correct so many times they're annoyed with hitting correct, because what it's doing is building trust with our system that it's right. Because if it's wrong and they correct us, great. We train the system. We like lower the confidence on that, and we know that we made a mistake. But if they hit confirm enough times, then after a bit, when we get a high enough confidence, we'll trigger them saying, "Hey, we feel that we're confident to now make these predictions. Do you want us to run it in like autopilot?" And they'll just say yes. When they click that, then we'll start to take over the surgeries from them. So it's a bit of a phased approach, and I think that that's really important. That even if we could go in on day one and detect every event, I wouldn't want to do that. I would really want to build up the trust with the team that we're making those right predictions, because I think that's a really important part of any like working with hospitals is the tech can work perfectly, but if the team don't like it or they don't believe in it, it doesn't matter. It won't work no matter what. So you really have to think about like this change management of how you get the team bought into it, and trust is really the biggest piece.
Yeah, I think especially in the OR, trust would be a huge piece.
A
I was
hundred
just,
percent.
really curious about how, the model would be trained, and the simulated OR with the mannequins, I think is sounds like an expensive solution, but I feel like that would definitely work. I think
Yeah,
that's a really cool solution.
I mean, in the expensive solution, it's not really that much, because to be honest, what you can do with this is you get surgical students. You get like students who would be doing this over their weekend anyway because they want to practice suturing for like their upcoming exams and their studies, right? So it's not something that like you can actually get like very high quality people in there for quite cheap. It's not that expensive to run these for a couple days.
That, yeah, I actually didn't think about the students, and they better not mess up. I mean, it's
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
yeah. So, just another kind of curiosity, moving away from the technology, moving away from, I guess, Vitvio as a whole, kind of in the last phase of the interview. You did mention that when you followed your wife to Europe, and uh, I guess we'll get to the wife part later, but for the Europe part, I guess you're based now in London, and when it comes to the startup culture, having worked at both the Silicon Valley startup and now building kind of in London, what do you think the difference is like, across the Atlantic? How do you What are some of the biggest culture differences, mindset differences that you think you've observed?
I think that that gap is narrowing so much these days. I honestly, I have met, like, and this is London, wider Europe, like looking at Poland. I used to live in Czech Republic, and that's where like Kiwi.com, where I met them. That gap is like almost non-existent anymore. It exists massively with the bigger companies. When you're talking about that like larger company I was in before, and some of the others of that size and beyond, European mindset is much slower, more conservative, so on. It's not that way with the startups. Like the startups in Europe are just as hungry, if not hungrier, than a lot of the like Silicon Valley startups I've met. But you know what I also think is nice about it, and this is just this might be a controversial opinion, is that I think a lot of the one thing that the European startups don't have that sometimes the Silicon Valley ones do is ego. Like the European startups will be just as talented, just as hardworking with very little ego comparatively to some of the startups that you might meet in Silicon Valley. And I think that that gives them a benefit. I really think the European startup culture is growing massively. And I think that that's going to continue in that trend because they are being it's westernized. It's like it is moving more towards the Silicon Valley style day in day, and you're seeing that when you look at the new startups that are growing within Europe. Like the percentage of like share of unicorns in Europe is growing massively compared to US as well. I mean, the US is still way up there, don't get me wrong, but I'm just meaning their share historically has been much lower than what it is today, and where I think it's going to go. I think that that gap will definitely narrow massively over the next 3 or 4 years as well. I always tell people, and I see this happening more often, is that you don't need to be in Silicon Valley to create startup. And sometimes, from like a cost perspective and from like let's say the culture perspective, it can be better to sometimes get out of it a little bit and just go see what it's like elsewhere. But there is still the Silicon Valley effect. But I think that that's more of like a networking effect. Like when you're in Silicon Valley, you're just surrounded by people, movers and makers like all the time. And I think that that's still the big thing that you can't get anywhere else than the Valley.
Yeah, I mean, being right next to it here, I feel like there's always so much going on. I mean, even
Yeah,
students around me are, going crazy with multiple startups, full-time students. It's insane sometimes, but it's a really cool environment. But yeah, I didn't know that, things were really, uh, coming kind of converging in Europe as well towards
it's
this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not across all of Europe. I would say that there's a couple places. Like if you're looking at like London, Amsterdam, Warsaw, Barcelona, that's like there's a ton of boom going on there. And I think that that's going to continue. But definitely it's still, Valley's a place to be, but I think that people are going to be waking up and some of the Valley might be moving out to Amsterdam and to London pretty soon here.
I can't wait to see it happen.
Yeah,
Moving back to the wife question. So
yeah.
did you say you proposed to her after 2 weeks?
Yes. Yes, I did. It gets even funnier. So, this is not a joke. We actually met in Seattle, and I basically like slid her my phone number and said like, "Hey," and she's like, "I don't have a phone." Slid it back, and I was like, "Oh, that's not great." She's like, "Oh, I have a Facebook, whatever." Long story short, we reconnected. She sent it to like some message queue, but didn't add me, and I didn't know that that even existed on Facebook at the time. So she found one time we ran into each other, and she's like, "Hey, you know what? Why are you ignoring me?" And I was like, "Whoa, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that." She was on like a work and travel visa in the U.S., like from Europe. She's from Czech Republic, so she was out there for like 6 months. And she's like, well, I'm leaving in a week and a half anyway. So I was like, all right, that's a shame. Well, long story short, I was like, hey, just go for a coffee with me tonight, or like this afternoon. Let's just chat. It's just nice to have a chat and get to know each other. And it went so well. Like just for the next 2 weeks, we were or next week we were inseparable. Then she flew down to LA to do like a bus tour of the Grand Canyon and everything. She calls me. She's like, "Hey, I want to fly back and see you for an extra week. Is that okay?" And I was like, "Absolutely, come back." Well, she flies back a week later, so 1 week together, 1 week apart. That day when I pick her up at the airport, go to the like bring her back to my apartment, I wrote on my wall in tinfoil, "Miliwitie," which means "I love you" in Czech. And I had saved everything I could, and I booked us a dinner in the Space Needle that evening. Like it's a five-star revolving restaurant, so I booked it in the Space Needle. I was very very poor back then, dirt poor. So this is a big deal for me. And that long story short, like that night I proposed to her, and she said yes. And the funniest part was She didn't answer yes right away. She's she said the funniest thing, and it's kind of unromantic, but it's also hilariously romantic. She said, "Yeah, but aren't you worried about us like getting divorced or like splitting up?" And I said to her like because like we only knew each other for 2 weeks, and I said, statistically speaking, there's a 50% chance of divorce anyway. But what I said to her, but I never asked myself if we'd get divorced. I always asked myself, if we got divorced, would I ever regret it? And I was like, no, I wouldn't regret it for a minute. I would be really happy that it happened at all. And she was like, all right, I'm in. Let's do it. So, yeah, I actually proposed to her after 2 weeks. She said yes. She had to go back to Czech Republic, and unfortunately, when she got back to Czech Republic, she found out that her father had pancreatic cancer, and she was gone for about 6 months. He had only he was supposed to have already passed by the time she got back, so he never really told her. So I immediately flew out there, got to meet him. He walked her down the aisle, and he was our best man. And that's actually how I came to Europe in the first place, was to follow her out here to support him at first, but then just kind of stayed because it was while we were taking care of him, I was looking for a new role, and went into Kiwi to basically take that on.
Wow, that's quite a story. That's really sweet. Wow, no, that's a lot to process, but I think it's
No, it's best decision of my life ever.
yeah.
Honestly, we have a son now that's 10 months old. A couple days ago, so
Congratulations.
we're yeah. Thank you. We're very happy.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Um, wow. Okay. Kind of shifting into, and this is an abrupt transition, but
Let's do it.
last, last bits of the interview. One thing I like to ask, especially with you working in OR tech, the OR is obviously a very high stress environment, and on top of that, being a founder is, incredibly stressful as well. So how do you kind of manage this in your personal life? Any personal interests, hobbies, things you do to kind of alleviate this, make things easier on your day to day, get your creative juices flowing, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to get outside, to just see sunlight sometimes and take that minute. So, what I'll very often do is make a point of like stopping throughout the day, even when you have a ton of things on your plate and you're overloading, you have like 1,000 things you need to juggle and manage and so on. I'll always try to take a moment and go get a coffee, go outside, walk for a little bit to see the sun. Make sure that I'm like taking it all in and just taking a breather, because it's very easy to just go and not never take that break. The other thing is, as a founder, I think it's really like the utmost importance to surround yourself with people that you want to be around all the time, that you're like every time that you talk to them, you're feeling like you're growing as a person, or that you're passionate, you've shared the same passions, that you're able to really, you feel like you're like Spartans standing in the same line shoulder to shoulder, and you feel that, even without having to say it. And I think that that also helps a lot, is to know that when I get up in the morning, I've got like this, amazing co-founders, amazing team around me, that I'm like, I feel like we can do it, and we've got each other's back, and that helps a lot. Yeah. Other than that, I love to ski and I love to scuba dive, so I try to get to do that at least once or twice a year whenever I can. But haven't had that luck in a little while.
How is skiing in the UK? I went skiing for the first time about 3 weeks ago, so
Oh,
I'm terrible.
nice.
I'm absolutely terrible at it. But thankfully, I'm not too far from Tahoe, so we got great snow up here.
Yeah,
How is
yeah, yeah.
how is the snow in the UK? Do you go skiing in the UK?
There is no snow in the UK. Like, the snow is in Austria. So Austria, Switzerland, France, etc. I go to Austria. I've got a buddy out there that owns like a B&B on the side of a ski resort, and it's amazing. It's kind of like it's out in a place called Nostell, right on the border to Italy. And it's amazing because you can basically, you take it to the top of the mountain and you can ski down into Italy and have breakfast, like pasta and a pizza in Italy, and a glass of wine, ski back up, and go straight back down to Austria. And it's like the best skiing I've ever seen. I've been out to Tahoe, I've been to Park City in Utah, and all this. It's really great. But I love the European skiing. It's my favorite.
I'll definitely have to check it out
Go
someday.
skiing together, huh?
Yeah, I'll probably be on the ground most of the time, but yes, you should.
You
Sounds
got to
like
start somewhere, man.
that's true. That's true. So kind of last question to wrap things up. You already kind of touched on this when talking about, surrounding yourself with people that you just really want to be with, your line of Spartans. But do you have any advice for other founders, students, or even people in general trying to break into or just interested in the health tech and entrepreneurship space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would really come back to that though. Is like when you're going to do this, first off, assume you know nothing and base it on research and base it on like you. I always have this. I have this saying is like strong opinions held lightly. Like go get new data and hold really strongly onto that opinion. But the moment that there's something else that like some new data or new research that comes in or something that can show you that what you previously thought was wrong, let it go. Don't let your ego get in your own way. And that's something that I had to learn the hard way in the past. Like being in product is like product. You're not a CEO, but you're like a micro CEO of your little piece. And I've made a mistake in the past where I've gone down a path for too long without realizing that it was my own bias, my own ego in it. And luckily that we've avoided that pretty well in what we're doing now. Of course, it'll never be perfect, but I think we've been doing a pretty good job of it. So first one is base it on research, base it on like assume you know nothing, but then also once you have that opinion, hold them strongly, but let it or like strong opinions held lightly, and then just surround yourself with the right people. And honestly, it's a game winning culmination of things. If I look at the startups that I've been in the past, and what was the one thing that they all had, it was always the people. It was always like the culture, this like spirit, because it didn't matter. Like if you were in the wrong direction or made a mistake, it wasn't like a blame culture. It was like, you know what? No, like new direction. Let's go. We got this. Like continue, head down, let it go, move on, do the next thing, and just try to index for doing that because you're going to fail sometimes, but and you're not going to always get it right. God knows I've done it more than enough. But the point is, if you just try it again and you have the right people around you, you're bound to hit gold at least at one of those times. And you don't need to hit gold every time. You need to hit gold once to be able to build something amazing.
Yeah, I think that that's advice that's been echoed by a lot of other people we've talked to, and I think it's definitely some of the most valuable. Getting the right team. That's part of why I love Health Engine too. We have an amazing team here working on all this stuff. Getting the right team is definitely the biggest part of the process. But thank you so much for spending the time on this interview. I think it was amazing to hear from you, hear your stories. Definitely uh, lot to touch on. Very interesting, and your advice has been amazing. Your perspectives are really great. Um, but yeah, thank you for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and Health Engine's amazing. You guys are great. So really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.